What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Actuali Podcast. I'm Chris,
I'm DJ.
and tonight we're going to be continuing our journey through John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. This is episode 18 on Plotinus and Neoplatonism. In our previous episode, we covered Gnosis and existential inertia, or I should say Vervaeke covered Gnosis and existential inertia, and we provided our commentary on that. Let me go ahead and get us live here on Facebook really quickly. I'll be right back, fam. Yeah, so we talked about in our previous episode how we can be fractured in that war with ourselves. How it feels like cosmic forces have a way of affecting us. And Gnosis was a way that people developed to begin to find ways to orient themselves. All right, what's up, everybody? Hey, Facebook fam. We are live once again, covering John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, Part 18, Plotinus and Neoplatonism tonight. We were just discussing the previous episode, Gnosis and existential inertia.
Yeah, I mentioned a book, Sovereignty of the Good. We discussed sensibility, transcendence. It's not the reason of morality, but the viability of morality. So viability means livability. Is it something you can actually see yourself living in? So when we use the word viable, we're talking about something that can be a lived-in option. There was a lot, so
the Gnosis attempt was to try and control this axial age revolution and its influence, its culmination and direction. And so our worldviews were becoming increasingly integrated in ways of seeing ourselves and the world in a form of mutual conformity, of reciprocal revelation. And we were gaining this participatory knowing with our environments, recognizing this, and the difference between believing in something and actually it being a livable opportunity is what the early Gnostics and Christians were trying to figure out.
It was like, taking the words instead of just reading the words and intellectualizing the words, but actually living within the words was an example. And our process of reasoning, which depends on what we love and how we care and what we care about. And he mentions the idea of the unthinkable.
Yes.
Things that aren't, he mentioned, like kicking his son out of the house. That's unthinkable for him because it's not a livable option in his head. He could do that and he'd have a little extra room to have something, a studio or something in there, or this, that, or the other. But it's unthinkable because of the love and care he has with his child. So something that is unthinkable is something that is unviable, unlivable. And so we got a note here. We can run the thought, but cannot make a viable living world. And this brings us into say you got a goal that you want to get to, and you can think about it and be like, I could do this or this to lead me along the goal and everything, but it's not really a livable option for you. Creating a certain amount of stuckness. You have to forgive me. There's last episode was very notes dense, and if we go through all of it, it's going to take an hour and a half.
It was, actually. It was a very dense episode. It was a great episode. But we did learn about knowing by loving, and that mutually accelerated disclosure. We learned again about how we can bullshit ourselves, and that's the technical term there, BS ourselves. Existential inertia is that, yes, there's a state that one wishes to be in, but we feel stuck.
Yeah, and you can tell yourself all that you want, but cannot make the change.
It's like that sense of dukkha in Buddhism.
Going back to this.
A wheel off kilter, you just can't seem to get it quite in alignment.
And sometimes if you try, you could lose your agency in the trying, and you could feel powerless, and then be even more stuck than you were stuck before.
Yeah. So we learned how traditional therapy that we have nowadays, actually has an agapic orientation. So we've learned about the 3 different kinds of love, eros, philia, and agape. And agape is the kind of love that Jesus presented to the world. It's also the love that we see exhibited by parents to their children. And it's a selfless kind of love. It's a creative kind of love. It's a quite unconditional love as well. We talked a lot in our last episode about forgiveness and how we can give love and forgiveness itself prior to its, prior to anything. We can just give it outright rather than expecting something to happen first before we give that love.
Yeah. So he brought up a little thought experiment of you're tasting a new fruit, and you'll either love it or you'll hate it precisely because of its differences, but you don't know until you try the fruit. Now with this example, there isn't really a big stake, so it's just take a bite of the fruit, and whatever. If you don't like it, you spit it out. But then what if you took it a little further? What would be what would it be like to have a kid? You won't know what you have to sacrifice until you do it, and you won't know the benefits of it until you do it. And that's where we have ritualistic traditions,
role playing, jeep form
that allows, and even kids. I mentioned last week, kids playing house. The boy kid, walks in and pretends to be tired and puts down the briefcase and sits down, and then the little girl comes up with the fake eggs on there, and then trying to, in a safe way, touch on, or in a safe way, play at,
identity,
and participate in these ideas.
Yeah.
And you can do this within a therapy session too. There's one thing, years ago I was looking at, it was exposure therapy for guys with PTSD in the military. So they'd use, at this time it was pretty primitive VR, but what they would do is they would put them into, say, I don't know, where they got injured, they were in a tank. So they'd put them in a tank simulator, and they'd go through the simulation and bring them out and talk with them and do that, and then put them in again and keep exposing them to it in a safe place to keep going through it, to then be able to
go
get
through
over
the trauma.
This what we're discussing here is similar to that, but different in a way, where instead of having gone through it and then being scarred by it and then trying to get past that, what we're doing is we're trying to try things out without having to do the life or death, if you will.
That's why we do serious play, because it puts us in a liminal zone where we can intelligently gain social acuity, or whatever kind of acuity, in any different situation that we can imagine before actually going through it. So it's not only about fun and sensory stimulation. It's very many things. Playing music is a very serious thing sometimes. Tai Chi, there's deep engagement with the processes, there's transformation that occurs as a result. So this is a very important kind of play that humans and other mammals access.
Because at the end of the day, you don't know till you know, and you won't know until you do.
So ritual is a very sophisticated kind of play.
He also mentioned, somebody who's in therapy, and say they're stuck on an idea and they don't want to change their mind about the idea, but they know they need to change their mind about that idea. Well, in this case, he's talking about, you go in further and it's what's something that you like about yourself you wouldn't change? And the person's my tenacity and stick-to-itiveness. So the note I have for that is the things you want to change, you also don't want to change too. So that's one of the things that sticks you as well. It's I like that, stubbornness about myself. I make sure that I'm not a pushover and everything. But sometimes maybe the problem is you need to be a little bit more yielding.
We learned how altered states of consciousness, higher states of consciousness experiences motivate us to self-transform, to self-transcend. So they're very important in that way. And that perspectival transformation that can occur then changes our participatory relation with our environments, with reality and other people. And then we are able to more fluidly engage in the process of reciprocal revelation or reciprocal realization, where as I become wiser, you are becoming wiser as well. We are, the agent and the arena are informing one another, or the agents are informing one another mutually, like an interdependent relationship versus a codependent sort of relationship.
So we've talked about an active analogy, which is like combining the perspectival and the participatory experience. Which, so an active analogy would be like a good game or a good ritual that gets you close enough to,
the context of a certain situation,
and blurs that psychodrama with real life. And the analogy part is it's a game. Like say the game, like say chess is simulating warfare. It's a very, on a board as far away from warfare as you can get. But say like, we have like strategy games and other stuff like that. So that's the same thing. You're using an analogy to try to help you go through the experience, to gain the insights that you would if you were having that experience, but without the danger of, dying or breaking your leg.
So you can learn tactics without being in a real battle, for instance, when you play
even
chess.
if it's just like, interpersonal stuff too. Like,
or problem solving.
Learning things.
Interpersonal learning
in
together.
a way where you're not going to offend somebody else so bad that they don't want to talk to you anymore.
Engaging in competitive play that is actually boosting both of your intelligence and your problem solving acuity together mutually. So these kinds of practices, these psychotechnologies that we've developed, these technologies of our psychology that we've developed, allow us to overcome existential inertia, that feeling of stuckness, and they can be particularly powered up by altered states of consciousness, chanting, sleep, plant medicines, so on and so forth. This is how we free ourselves from these existential traps, and the primary existential trap that is the subject of this entire series, the meaning crisis, as Vervaeke has termed it. The meaning crisis that is existing around the world and civilizations all over the planet, in which we are experiencing social breakdown, distrust in the prevailing institutions, be they political governing systems, be they religious, be they media, be they judicial, so on and so forth. Our trust in our prevailing authorities and institutions and moral systems that we would rally around are degrading. And we are in a time to where we have to kind of recapitulate the old wisdom that is still good and useful for us, and as we become more sophisticated in our understanding of our reality. And so it's quite the interesting quagmire we've gotten ourselves into. But it's a beautiful one too, and it seems almost an inevitable one for an intelligent species to run into at this point in its evolution. So this is all part of the process, fam. We don't have to panic. We can actually surf this tidal wave, or do our very best at. Yeah, right there. I like that. Don't panic. It's organic. Old tigers are organic. You might want to let the panic run through your system so you get that adrenaline to run in that case. Yeah. But right now, the humans, we do find, are quite socially adept animals. We're great at working together. We're like ants. When we come together, we can create bridges across impossible moats that we never would have been able to cross by ourselves. So we have that power, and this series is an invitation into awakening from the meaning crisis together.
So before we get to the next episode, I like Vervaeke's definition of gnosis, and it's a two-parter. What gnosis does, it attempts to bring about an altered state of consciousness, and in this through ritual. So, and gnosis is to have a set of psychotechnology that allows us to overcome the stuckness and stupefaction through ritual. So we're trying to alter our state of consciousness through a set of psychotechnologies with a ritual component to unstick and unstupefy ourselves in a situation that may be unthinkable for us because we cannot put ourselves into living in that circumstance, even though we really want it to happen.
Yeah.
And I like that because like gnosis is one of those words that's like it's got 1.5 million different meanings for the same word, and most of them are.
It's a very confusing subject.
Useful.
Vervaeke is very helpful here in helping us understand what gnosis was when it began, how Gnosticism developed, and the dark sides of when that ideology perhaps went wrong in some ways, or just kind of went dark, you could say. So we're going to challenge our understanding of ancient Christianity and Gnosticism, and we are going to see how they actually became quite intermarried. In fact, the way most churches worship today is inspired by the original Gnosis movement that was happening at the time. The Gnosticism thing is something else altogether, and we'll get into that as well. And Vervaeke does an excellent job of helping us understand what all of this is all about. So join us. We're about to tune in now. It's a watch party, and it's going to be part 18 of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, Plotinus and Neoplatonism. Here we go.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. So last time we were taking a look at a group of people. As I said before, the Gnostics shouldn't be understood as forming like their own community or group, although there might have been some Gnostic churches. We should think of them more like we think of existentialism or fundamentalism. You can be a fundamentalist Christian or Muslim or Jew, etc. It's more about a style, a way of being, a way of understanding and interpreting, and that it was pervasive during the same period as early Christianity, and the two are interacting with each other. In fact, as we'll see, many Gnostics thought of themselves as Christians. So we were taking a look at how to go about interpreting Gnosticism. Why are we doing this? We're doing this because I'm presenting the Gnostic movement as the axial revolution within the axial revolution. It's taking the revolution to its culmination in many important ways that I think have direct relevance for us today. In order to do that, I'm presenting to you something like the cognitive science of what Gnosis actually is. And in order to do that, we've been making use of some important work by Harry Frankfurt and L.A. Paul. The basic idea is that we can talk about people being existentially trapped, and that is a result of them being existentially stuck. They have inertia. They do not know how to engage the anagoge in order to make a worldview viable to them, and they are existentially indecisive. They are existentially stupefied because they're facing a deep transformative experience, and they don't know how to reason their way through it. They don't know if they should do it. And that existential entrapment can be very, very damaging. It can fragment your world and tear apart your agency. And so people can suffer from this in a profound way, which means Gnosticism, as Hans Jonas and other people have seen, is directly relevant to a lot of the modern confrontation with meaninglessness and nihilism, because in the meaning crisis, people also similarly feel deeply existentially trapped. So what is needed? I argued, is a recovery of serious play through the engagement in ritual behavior. This ritual play affords an individual to engage in enactive analogy so that they can get into that liminal state in which they can, in a perspectival and participatory manner, bridge in a very apt way between the world and the self that they are now and the world and the self they want to viably become. That enacted ritual should also afford anagoge. It should afford the transframing, the reciprocal anagogic process by which self and world are transformed such that we can go through the sensibility transcendence which will make a worldview viable to us. That combination, that ritual combination of enacted analogy and enactive anagoge is empowered by the cognitive flexibility brought on by an altered state of consciousness, hopefully a higher state of consciousness that gives us a sense of the increased realness, the more realness of the world that we are trying to move into. So that higher state of consciousness, as we've talked about before, motivates us to go through this radical transformative experience. Now, of course, there are dangers associated with all of this. When we are engaging in this kinds of radical transformation of our salient landscape, when we are putting ourselves and our world at risk, when we are inducing altered states of consciousness, there is a significant chance that we will fall prey to parasitic processing, to bullshitting ourselves, to deceiving ourselves. And therefore, it is very important, and this is also part of what was going on with Gnosticism, to build up a community, a shared mythology, a shared set of psychotechnological practices, a shared social network of distributed cognition to provide sapiential feedback, guidance, correction, and encouragement for people when they are endeavoring to go through the kind of transformation that will release them from this existential entrapment. So you have some higher state of consciousness, hopefully that has some aspects of being a higher state of consciousness, and that is going to be set within a ritual framing that I've been talking about, and then you want that in turn set within an important sapiential and supportive community that is teaching you all kinds of the relevant skills by which one can bring wisdom, the ability to overcome self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior, to bear upon this transformation. When all of that is the case, this is what Gnosis is. It's this kind of deeply transformative, deep perspectival participatory knowing that is ritually inframed and embedded with a sapiential and supportive community. So, community. So, what do we have going on here is a project that was addressing the Dharmacide, that it was still in existence, persisting from the Hellenistic Dharmacide that we were spoken about. It's also, as I mentioned, one of the reasons why Christianity took root, because while the Roman Empire offered a socio-political solution to some of the problems of the ancient world, it didn't have a viable answer on its own to the meaning crisis, the Dharmacide of the Hellenistic period. Things like Stoicism had been generated. But Christianity is a significant response. And at the same time, this movement, this Gnostic movement arises. Now, these Gnostics, many of them, not all of them, saw themselves as Christians. They interpreted Jesus as somebody who had brought them Gnosis. And for them, the important thing was not to believe in Jesus, but as much as possible to become like Jesus, to go through the kind of radical transformation to be at one with God the way Jesus was. Now, whether or not we believe in that particular mythology, two things we need to note for our purposes in this course. We need to note that Gnosticism and Christianity are deeply talking to each other and informing each other, even though in many ways they'll have an oppositional relationship. we're going to see that both Gnosticism and Christianity are also in a very important dance and intermeshment with Neoplatonism. Now, many people, and I put it out with the examples of Jeep form and therapy and martial arts, right? Many people are seeking Gnosis today because Gnosis is the kind of thing you need in order to bring about a release from the existential entrapment that we're finding in the meaning crisis. Now, what's interesting about the Gnostics is they create a mythology for all of this. And I think the best, because if you just read their stuff, it's like, man, it's like if you were strung out on an incredible acid trip and everybody was speaking in reverse. It is so hard. Their stuff is so bizarre and weird and strange. But I think if you pay attention to some of the main themes of the mythology, you can see how it is a mythological scaffolding for bringing about Gnosis. A book I would recommend to you is April DeConnick's book, The Gnostic New Age. In that, she does some good work at bringing out some of the central themes of this movement. And she also points out how much Gnosticism is prevalent in our culture today, mythologically. And you may say, what do you mean by that? Well, many movies, and she shows this in the book, actually have a Gnostic theme. The mythology of the movie, and movies are where we go to play with a lot of our mythology, actually are pretty clear versions of this Gnostic mythology. So what is this mythology? So the Gnostics have an idea, and you can see part of it comes from Plato. There's an influence from Plato. So if you remember, Plato has this idea about the everyday world, right? The everyday world is a world like the shadows and the echoes. These things are not fully real. This table, this wall, this pen, they're in a profound sense images, right? They participate in the forms. You remember those patterns of intelligibility and realness. So Plato had a problem, which is the forms are basically eternal. So if you think of something like, E equals mc squared, right? That's not an event. It's sort of timeless and spaceless. And then how do these eternal forms, how do they express themselves in the temporal things, the things that are changing here? So basically, how do time and eternity intersect? And so Plato proposed a mythological answer. He proposed that there was a figure, he called the figure the craftsman, the demiurge. And what the demiurge is he can sort of become aware of these because he's a rational agent. And then what he does is he shapes things in space and time in order to make the world of becoming have some reality to it. And so it has some important similarities to the eternal world. And that means that by paying attention to temporal events, we can become aware of these eternal principles, sort of what science does right now. Now, whether all of that is true, I think in an important sense it's not true. There's a mythological point here. Plato is trying to understand mythologically the relationship. He's trying to give us a way in imagery and story of understanding the relationship between eternity and time. Now, the Gnostics were influenced by this, but they took this notion and they did something very interesting to it. Because they said the temporal world, the everyday world we're in, is a world of very significant suffering. So remember, they're after the Hellenistic domicide. They're during a period both where the Hellenistic domicide is still in existence and the Roman Empire has caused massive pain and suffering throughout the world. So they're looking at the everyday world and they're seeing all this suffering. They're feeling deeply trapped within it, existentially trapped, in the way we've been talking about. So for them, that was very clear evidence that whoever had created this world was either stupid or evil or both. They were looking around the world and saying, look at how much we suffer. Look at how much pain we're in. Look at how much we're trapped. And therefore, whatever is creating the structures that we're living in is both stupid and evil. So in Plato, the demiurge is basically a beneficent being, but in here, the demiurge very often becomes something like an evil overlord. Now, what's going on here? Well, what they're trying to do is articulate, again, the sense of being trapped, and that the socioeconomic, sociocultural, political economic structures that they find themselves in are actually thwarting them. And now when I say it that way, it's like, oh, maybe that's a mythological way of talking about something that you might be experiencing. You're experiencing existential entrapment, and then when you look out at the patterns of your culture, the patterns, right, the market patterns, the political patterns, you don't feel like they are shaping a world that is going to help alleviate your entrapment. Instead, you feel that they are stupid and evil. And I know from a lot of the research we did for the book on zombies with the work I did with Chris and Philip, more and more people view their myths, their deeply repeated cultural, political, socioeconomic patterns, not as helping them, but as thwarting their efforts to be free from their existential entrapment, adding to their fragmentation and their suffering. So whether or not we believe in the Gnostic supernaturalistic way of talking about this, which I don't, we can nevertheless understand what they are articulating. We have this existential entrapment, and we have socio-political, socio-cultural patterns that are designed to further that entrapment, further our self-deception, further our self-destruction, keep us enmeshed in modal confusion, or keep us awashed in parasitic processing, keeping us trapped, stuck, and stupefied.
All right, guys. Let's cover what we just went through. So, Vervaeke is describing this gnosis that had come about in the world as a way of understanding and being, not so much a particular theology or spiritual belief, but a way
style of thinking and believing.
Yeah, of a way of being, ritualistic framing, supportive community, relevant skills, all these traits, wisdom, allows us to overcome BS and self-deception, a methodology, you could say, a psychotechnology that we can employ to achieve deeper understanding. So this is starting to really come about in the times of early Christianity.
Yeah, and he discussed the dangers of this radical transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And the dangers are getting stuck in parasitic processing.
For sure.
And
which is
bullshit.
The way that we can BS ourselves, the way that we can self-deceive.
And so gnosis, he settled, so a higher state of consciousness experience surrounded by a ritual framing and then a supportive community around that. Mm-hmm. That's also instructive as well.
Yes, provides feedback.
And so that's like
guidance, encouragement.
That's the framework. But now, if you take any of these, take any of these layers, like say the supportive community becomes nihilistic, as we,
that can happen under certain social, political, cultural circumstances.
Yeah. So both
So in this time, they're trying to develop a mythology to explain
Yeah.
these early Gnostics.
Yeah, and both the Gnostics and Plato agreed on the idea of this demiurge that, what would Plato say, the
There's the
everyday
thing that
world is
forms.
shadows and echoes, and there's an infinite amount of those, and then you look at how they express themselves in time, and then there's something that became aware of that and now controls that and shapes it to the ideal space and time that, the celestial world, like the way, the world the gods live in kind of world. The disagreement, though, ended up happening, whereas, Plato thought of this as, a beneficent, doing it for the betterment of everything in the world. The Gnostics really didn't believe that, because at the time they were watching everything fall apart.
This is post-Hellenistic
Yeah,
era.
and this
The
is,
Roman
not happy
Empire
good
is
times,
particularly destructive and powerful empire.
So they looked at the world through, like, suffering. And he didn't use this word, but suffering and the victims to the suffering.
Yeah, they were still experiencing that on the edge of this long-term domicile experience during the Hellenistic era, where people felt a sense of homelessness in their own countries and their own villages and their own homes.
So if you believe in this myth of this demiurge, now you're going to think, well, either they're stupid or they're evil or they're both. And they're, they've trapped us here, and all the systems that are being set up here are just to further this stupid, evil demiurge's
some kind of theological
control
grudge.
whim. Yeah, well, you can see that in a lot of, like, how we pose arguments on what's wrong with the world and what we should do about it. You can see that there's a very
So
I will not say in everybody or even a lot of people, but there are people that will be like, well, it's all these systems that are just tearing us down. It's just to further this one group of people, or in the case of the demiurge, bring the demiurge down to the level of people. And now it's this person or this group of people's fault, or
It's always the others.
let's
There's
call
some
that
form
the
of
others,
others.
that other group. And it's not always the same people every time we go through these cycles either. We shift who we're putting the blame on, and then the people pointing also shift.
Yeah.
And like I
It's
can
a very-
understand why, like, after the Hellenistic period,
Sure.
people would have such a, like, there's this thing, and it's just watching us squirm like ants in a box. And
Well, people were being taken over multiple times. All of these different cultures were being smashed together, basically, and then their gods were being stood up against one another. And the young people especially, growing up in this world, new people coming up, you don't know what to believe. You don't know what's supposed to be right as the society tries to reform itself into some semblance of stability. So Plato, in his time, was trying to give us the stories that we can relate to eternity and time and these social, political, and communal situations we find ourselves in. The Gnostics took this a step further. They did see so much suffering, and they did come up with this evil overlord idea.
Yeah, well, isn't that
That what creates must be stupid or evil
well,
to create a world like this.
isn't that an album from Rage Against the Machines, the one with that, like, the like 1950s propaganda art, but like Superman looking kid, like, yeah, I think it's either, it might have been Evil Empire, I don't know, either way.
Evil Empire.
But yeah, and I guess it, like, when you are experiencing massive amounts of dukkha, like, and this is personally, not just in the whole world, but when you are, it does feel better to have this thing that you can say is responsible for it, and it's even easier when that thing is cruel or stupid.
Right.
Because if it's cruel, you don't care about it at all, and if it's stupid, well, it's just stupid.
Yeah, and this was a time where people believed in gods, generally. So now this new version of a god to explain the world as it is was one that was born out of our resentment for what had happened to the world, our suffering, our sense of stuckness.
Yeah.
And so this is the dark side of Gnosticism itself. So we're trying to separate the usefulness of gnosis, the practice of gnosis, which is absolutely, you see that
the having
bear
the
fruits
transformative
in
experience
Christianity,
within
Judaism,
the-
Buddhism, and yogiism and Hinduism and spiritual systems all across the planet. We see gnosis style psychotechnologies, ritualistic, meditative practices being employed to allow people to achieve higher states of consciousness so that they are motivated to self-transcend into this path, this way of self-transcendence,
Well,
this orientation of agapic love towards the environment and one another so that we can engage in this co-creation together.
We actually, like, even on like kind of like a stupid baser level, we do this with like team building exercises where they all go out and they, you know, each have these transformative higher states of consciousness experience, usually by I don't know, they have to, like, you know, pull something up a hill,
or you all gotta hold the ropes and balance the tennis
together.
ball in the center kind of
and
stuff.
then you're doing rituals.
They're literally rituals,
and then it's
they're
within a
good.
community
They work.
that's trying to teach you. So the framework's still there.
It's a sadly scaled down,
and it's not
watered down.
It's not the framework is not evil. It's not good or evil. It's just effective.
Yeah, it's effective. Ritual is effective for us.
If any one of those points, any one of the points from the higher state of consciousness to the ritual or to the supporting community fails or gets corrupted, the chances of you going down, say, the wrong path with these realizations increases.
For sure.
So, for example, say if you're, if you're doing a entheogen-based higher states of consciousness, so you're taking a substance, say the substance is good, okay, and say the community of people around you are also good people and, have gone through stuff, but the setting, which would be your ritual, how you're doing it and where you're at, is wrong, then you're going into a bad trip and it's going to maybe scare the crap out of you or make you become bitter. Or even say you have a good higher state of consciousness experience, the ritual was proper, but the people that you're surrounded with are just icky, horrible people. You can see this in the Hollywood thing. Hollywood practices, Gnostic and Hermetic rituals all the time because they're effective. It's not a magical thing. There's a reason why, every star is raised in a certain way to be a certain way, like the teen pop star, first they're the innocent teen, and then they super sexualize them, and then they move them on through the system.
Yeah. And
are there award events and all that stuff too? It's the same thing. Now, Hollywood has pretty much always been filled with vapid, hollow people that are only looking after themselves. So you're missing that most important thing that nests the other two together. And, well, it's also, well known that Hollywood people join any cult feel-good thing or this, that, or the other and try it out. Like, be the beta testers and all the nonsense. Go out to the place and do the thing, and then, this thing or the other. That's how cults are made, too. You get a very controlling, restrictive communal system, and you move them through these steps, this Gnostic practice, if you will, and then you can get them to think pretty much whatever you want if you're smart enough to craft each feature properly.
Sure.
Because I don't believe
Scientology.
I don't believe God's malevolent, but I do believe there are malevolent people in the world. So.
For sure. There's certainly are malevolent intents that happen sometimes, and again, that would be born from resentment. Mm-hmm. It's funny how you can switch from seeing the ugliness of the world and see the beauty and see the helpers and feel gratitude. Just practice gratitude for simple little things and the people and loved ones in your life. And all of a sudden the whole world can brighten back up and be beautiful and be a gift again. Right. So it's really, this thing's pretty open-ended.
Gratitude is pretty great. And, just the act of showing gratitude, even just with a little nod of the head or even just feeling gratitude, is a lot. Mm-hmm. It is not hollow. It is not false. You can pretend to show gratitude, but you can never pretend to feel gratitude.
No.
But when you do feel gratitude,
you feel you feel belonging.
Yeah.
You feel needing. And you see the beauty in the little things. It's going to be a leaf scraping across the sidewalk because you stopped, you took a deep breath, you felt the world around you, you felt the coolness or the warmth of the air depending on where you are, the time of day, the smells in the air, the sounds of that present moment. And then something simple as a leaf scraping across the sidewalk or falling before your eyes or a bird flying by or just the way some kids sound as they're playing in the distance and the sounds of cars. Something will happen and you will remember how beautiful this life is, and it's easy to be grateful and in those moments, and it's easy to initiate those moments through gratitude.
Well, I think that feeling of true gratitude is kind of like a hue of the ultimate light that is God, if you will. Like if you're to feel like
You're resonating
that
with.
that feeling you get when you're truly grateful for something, and it may even like bring you to tears and break you down. That is just the tiniest focused light of God. Like
Yeah,
too
right.
much of it would blast you into nothing. They say if you see the face of God, you die. Like if you see the face of God, you're dead.
Yeah, there must have been a lot of. Well, there was a lot of different kinds of Gnostics out there, because we know the early Gnostics believed that their self-transcendence came through the example of Christ, and that he was like an answer to this demiurge almost, even maybe for the later ones. And that's kind of how that mix happened in early Christianity with Gnosticism.
Sure, and Christianity and Gnosticism had this dancing relationship with each other, sometimes antagonistic. Particularly certain types of Gnostic ideals where it's like, well, if you're going to be something, I have to be the anti of that to figure out the something. Later on we'll learn. I think he goes over this, but we'll learn the idea of synthesis, or what is it? Synthesis. No, synthesis is the last. So thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So the idea and then the anti-idea. Eventually, after battling it out, you'll get a synthesized realness, or like what is it? Abstract, concrete, and something else. But like, which is kind of the opposite of what Christ is. Christ isn't the thing and its opposites. It's the all things flowing through, continuously flowing through. It's a way opposed to being a rock in the way. It's the way opposed to in the way, or feeling like something's in your way.
Yeah, the way is to be the synthesis between the yin and the yang, the interrelating opposites, the seemingly separateness of life.
The real opposites, if you will, opposed to
our awakening to the fact that we are this one thing.
Yeah,
is what allows. I don't even know how that works.
Well, think about it like this.
That is what allows the culmination of perhaps our reason for existence, you could say.
Yes.
It's the difference between, as we learned earlier on, like the sage between the adult is the adult to the kid, to the child.
Yeah. It's a growing,
the realized master, the realized human. So the full human, the actually truly self-actualized human, ultimately has transcended its sense of psychological self and its attachment and its attachment to the temporal realm. It has transcended and is now flowing as one with as the world itself.
Yeah, and I think it's important, it's great to want the world to everybody in the world to experience that, but you can't force people to do it, and that
No.
That's where I think Gnosticism has really gone bad. It's like ways to use these great techniques to control massive amounts of people to do what you think is right, or
well, like any great power, the psychotechnology can be used for evil, can't it?
Well, like a knife inherently isn't an evil thing. You can use it to prep food, or you can kill somebody with it. It's just a tool. These are just tools. There is no morality behind the tool. Now, mind you, some tools were specifically
but
to
there are
torture
moral
people,
beings.
but we're not talking about those tools. We're just talking like in general. They are useful for an ends, and as far as I can see, the ends being able to create a proper worldview and be a participating agent within that world as efficiently as possible is good. However, where it goes bad is, whose opinion on what the world should look like and what, once they're up there.
Yeah.
That's where it's like you can't force people to do it. You just have to
invite
and inspire them to be like, wow, that seems to be working out for you. What are you doing? What's going on, buddy? You're like, oh, wow.
You inspire love, and you inspire uplifting, you inspire gratitude, you inspire hard work and perseverance and determination, and you also meet people where they are in their sorrows, and you find the beauty in the sorrows. This is how we work as artists and as human beings in our relations. This is how we can live. I believe that the optimized human, the best, most optimized human in our current form is built to be loving in the agapic sense, as Christ and Buddha and Ramana and so many others demonstrated. But most brightly, certainly, the story of Christ is a beautiful, emblematic example of pure, unconditional self-sacrifice, living in concert with this great mystery, but in the most optimal way. You can see a human, an individual, and then a larger community, nations, and a world operating for long-term survival.
That word self-sacrifice stuck out for me. So to sacrifice, you have to make something sacred. Or by sacrificing, you make it sacred. Or it has to be sacred to be worth being sacrificed.
We need the sacred.
In order to sacrifice, you really do have to, in a way, respect yourself enough to see the sacredness within yourself.
We need to bring back the sacred, even a sense of the sacred in the world again, because that's another thing that people are missing, is that what is sacred anymore? If we've killed the gods, like Nietzsche said, we've en masse started disbelieving in the gods that we grew up with, that we handed down for generations. And as we've spoken of before, sure, all of these different religions that we have around the world have their cultural baggage, and they also have beautiful, deep teachings as humans have been trying to express a relationship with the ineffable. We don't know how we got here. None of us do. And to this day, the wisest sage or religious teacher and the most intelligent scientist still don't have any clear definition of what reality is and how we're here and why we're here and any of those basic questions. So here we are, still figuring it out together and trying not to throw away the wheat and the chaff, the baby and the bathwater. Like, let's see what we've been trying to figure out here, because there is this great mystery. There is something that seems like God, and it does seem to be loving, and it does seem that our most optimal state is to be loving, so that we can be symbiotic with each other in our environments, at least as much as we're able, and live long and prosper. What else do you say to that? I don't know, man. I don't know where I'm going here, but this is is about to get into some good stuff, though.
So where we're at was talking about the evil overlord aspect, and the pitfalls of one aspect of.
We got into how gratitude shifts us. Gratitude is a way that we can shift ourselves from this.
Yes, because literally gratefulness is great. It's full of greatness. It's gratefulness.
It's recognizing the greatness and being full of it and thankful for it. Yeah. I like that. All right, guys, so now we're going to learn about Plotinus. This is really cool here.
So, for the Gnostics, right, they needed to try and link this to existing mythologies. And here's where they did something that is radical. They identified all the existing gods, whether it's the god of the Jews or the god of the Romans. Instead of seeing these gods as divine beings, they saw these gods as basically the guards of our prison. So they see everything else that people had thought of as previously sacred, all the gods, as actually things imprisoning us. Even Paul was talking about this in the Bible, where he talks about powers and principalities that keep us imprisoned. Now, I want you to stop and pause, because this is a radical idea. This is an idea that there has been something common to all of these gods that must now be challenged. So up until now, right, the relationship between us and them was one of servitude, often bordering on notions of slavery. We were the slaves or the servants of the gods. The Gnostics want to invert that. They want to tell you that instead of worshiping these gods, instead of idealizing these gods, instead of giving in to these powers and principalities, these patterns that are pervasive and profound in the way they entrap us, instead of thinking how we should serve and fit into them, think of this again. Remember the Actual Revolution. Don't try and fit into the everyday world. You want to transcend it. Instead of serving and fitting in, we have to transcend them all. They are not divine. They are our prison guards. They may be powerful, but instead, what we need to realize is that there is something in us, they thought of it as a divine spark, that will actually carry us above, to the God beyond all gods, which sounds like a contradiction, because of course that's what they're trying to get at. The idea here can be expressed using some of the Christian mythology that they were quite willing to. Well, it depends who you're talking to. If you're an Orthodox Christian, you see the Gnostics as perverting your mythology. If you're a Gnostic, you see yourself as disclosing by transformation what's actually available in the mythology. So, for the Gnostics, this God is the God of the Old Testament. Evil, jealous, vindictive, right, who threatens and bullies people, authorizes genocide, shows favoritism for no moral reason, is just and I mean think about he says, the God of the Old Testament, I'm a jealous God. Don't you dare worship anybody other than me, right? And if you do, I'll kill you, and I'll kill your kids, and I'll kill your kids' kids, and all this horrific stuff. And then that God is compared to the God of the New Testament, the God of agape, the God of light and love. And the idea is that God, who's the God beyond all gods, does not want our worship, wants us to reunite with him. He wants us to, or she wants us to fully participate. I have to say he and she specifically for the Gnostics is one of the things they also challenged was the difference between the genders in the ancient world. They're famous for that, of thinking women are as equally capable of a spiritual life as men. So, we are radically not at home because our capacity for agapic love means we have a Gnostic potential. We have the power, the potential to remember, to know that we belong here. We can sense that we don't belong here. We can sense that we belong somewhere else. We know there's something fundamentally wrong here. And then the idea is this God beyond all gods, this absolute fullness of being, sends individuals down into the world of suffering to bring us the gnosis, to bring us this kind of transformative knowledge that will set us free. And what the Gnostic Christians did is they said Jesus was this individual. So the Gnostics don't put a huge emphasis on the person of Jesus and his crucifixion. Instead, the teachings of Jesus are much more important to them. Because what is going to happen here is Jesus is going to bring us the way of knowing, gnosis of agape, so that we can free ourselves from this. So the Gnostics, therefore, don't see the purpose of Christianity as doctrine or dogma. The purpose of it is to give us a mythology that will free us from our existential suffering and allow us to experience this transcendence of the gods. Now this inversion, right, this radical inversion, it's like, that's what I mean, it's the culmination, it's the axial revolution that is finally applied to even to the whole mythological framework of the ancient world. And what it means is the Gnostics have a very, and this is one of the things that their critics often leveled against them, the Gnostics keep churning out new gospels and new stories and new myth, because for them it's not about having a final orthodox story, a final orthodox set of principles. It's about having engaged in, participated in the process of creating the inactive analogies, the enacted anagoge. That's what matters. That's what actually matters. Now, this idea that spirituality is ultimately about transcending the gods rather than serving the gods is very both pertinent to us today and very radical for its time. Because you have basically the challenging of not even a belief, it was just an unquestioned presupposition that our relationship to the gods was one of servitude and slavery, getting transformed into, the core of spirituality is not worship. The core of spirituality is self-transcendence.
Core is self-transcendence, the core of spirituality.
Yeah, from the Gnostics' perspective, not to subjugate yourself and work for these gods, be slaves to, be servants to, but to become beyond them.
Mm-hmm.
So what the Gnostics did was to identify all the gods and then basically turn them into prison guards. So finding the one thing that one characteristic they all share.
Mm-hmm.
The one commonality of all gods, if you will. And that relationship is a slave or servant relationship, and they wanted to invert it. So we must transcend the god and become the god beyond gods, or become to that state.
Yes, conjoin with that, become one with that. They want to say don't worship, don't accept the entrapment, the suffering, don't fit in, but transcend. These gods are not divine, they're our prison guards. And there's a divine spark in all of us that will carry us to the God of all gods. Higher than all of these little petty, mean, jealous, vindictive, angry gods that have, the God of the Old Testament idea that just seemed very genocidal, but it's really just a brutal, ruthless neutrality of nature unto humans that we were experiencing and responding to. It seems like
and our
it's just going to flood out of nowhere and kill everybody.
We'll call it our like societal maturity. It was at the point where it was we get praised and punished. Like you can take the human development scale, like so the first one being only what is praised, and then the next realization is only you do things because of what's punished, and then what is praised and punished, and being able to figure out the two, and then you start making decisions for yourself. You can track humanity to that. Now we're at the point where we're now starting to make decisions for ourselves, and now. We're still teenagers, adolescents, maybe college age, maybe,
So this is not so long ago anymore. We're catching up with ourselves in time, but we're still way back. I mean, if you think about in our terms of reality, we're still thousands of years ago.
I think 2,000 years ago that it was transitioning from child into adolescent. And we're now going from adolescent to teenager.
Yeah, because the New Testament is this beautiful agapic realization of light and love, and this is the expression of the God beyond all gods that is ever loving,
and the thing to strive,
ever forgiving,
the shooting for the stars, shooting at the highest high.
She wants us to reciprocate, And so at this time, religion was becoming more egalitarian because women were as welcome as men in the practice of Christianity. And of course, also were the poor and the orphans and the widows and everyone else that had been non-personed in the society of the Roman Republic.
And was it the Epicureans who were the philosophers that were first about, like, you know, women, children, everybody, they can participate?
I believe it was the Epicureans.
So that's, you know, that was then, and now it's, you know, Christianity
sure.
is kind of
picking up on that. Yeah, so we see the influence of
becoming
Platonism, and so this is where we start to develop Neoplatonism, which came about during this early Christian time. So this is beautiful. It's really exciting to understand how we got to this point. Yeah, I like this. So the Gnostics see God sending people like Jesus into the world to help to share the experience of gnosis with humanity. So the Gnostics really did focus more on the way of Jesus than on the dogma of, you know, religious rules and this and that. It was really about self-transcendence, a process of enacting anagage, higher states of consciousness and communion and oneness with the world.
And this idea that it was, like, say, a messenger that was sent from this higher God that is higher than the wrathful God, the real God, the God of light, the Son of the God of light, sending it down to us, you know.
So this is a big spiritual battle. This is where we get the idea of the devil now.
Yeah.
The evil Lord, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the purpose of Christianity is not dogma, but a mythology to give us the ability to transcend. It's not, and it wasn't about, so they wrote a lot of gospels and other things. So it's not about the gospel, it's about the participation in the crafting of.
So this is another level of human consciousness is growing here.
Yeah, so they were more concerned.
We're really growing our software, basically.
Yeah, they weren't concerned about having, like, good canon in their story and everything lining up perfectly and good dogma that's, like, clear, concise. The idea was participating in the making of it.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you're writing a myth, when you're writing a moral teaching in it's a story, it doesn't have to be scientifically correct. It needs to be just a powerful story that has a sense of timelessness and dreamlike quality to it that helps invite us into the liminal realm of co-creation.
And write a whole
because life is an imaginative process.
And write a whole bunch more, and they may contradict each other at points in time, so that's not the point. The point is to truly participate in the making of these myths. You know, that's why we tell each other stories and stuff like that. You know, I like to play Minecraft and other stuff, and I watch people who do really cool Minecraft stuff and will, like, role play certain things. Like, they'll get, like, you know, like 500 people on an island, and, you know, like, watching how people do their thing.
I was just thinking about Game of Thrones. You remember what was that one group of guys? The Red Sorceress lady came from them, but also there was the good side of them that were these kind of anarchistic.
Yeah,
but they worshipped the Lord of Light.
Yeah, the Lord of Light.
And so there's, like, the two sides there. It's like Christianity with this, like, dark Gnostic side of it.
I don't think that's a coincidence.
No.
I think he probably wrote it in, like, you know, all the old gods were brought together, saying that they were, you know, weak and, you know, petty and whatever, and this God of light will purge all of them, and it is the only one true, real God. Yeah, that's definitely a reference to, you know, this period of time, if you will. You know, if you're writing stories,
art imitates life, man.
If you're writing stories like he does, you have to be at least somewhat familiar with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, George R. R. Martin's big fan of ancient history.
Yeah. And I only say somewhat because, you know, depending on who you are, a little bit of knowledge is like vast volumes of knowledge compared to, you know, what I'm used to looking into. So
no, that guy put too much on his plate.
Oh man,
because he still hasn't finished writing those books, has he? Not as far as I know.
Nope, I think he's gonna let it die because they went ahead and killed it with that last season. And I'm not a huge fan of Game of Thrones or nothing. It took me a long time to binge watch it. And they just, when you give writers that aren't creative, they're just able to take something from something else and condense it down into a viewable medium. And don't get me wrong, there's a certain creative aspect to that, but not creative as in, like, world building and that level of stuff. That's it. They ruined it. It was terrible.
It was rushed. It felt forced. You could tell the script was
spent way too much money
inspired
on that
by the original artist. You know, the authors writing the books themselves. He had given them an idea what a direction of where he was going with it, and they had major plot points, I'm sure, but they still had their own spin on it, and they definitely did something with Daenerys that I felt was kind of out of character.
Yeah, and did you also notice that, like, you know, Tyrion used to actually be like witty and eloquent, and now it's just like cock and
The
ball
funny
jokes.
drunk guy, yeah.
Where it was funny cock and ball jokes before, but it was actually witty and
Heartful,
articulate,
sympathetic, understanding.
and all the characters were done like that.
Good,
But yeah,
deep
sorry,
down.
not to go off
Yeah.
on
But
complaining.
flawed, yeah.
But yeah, like myths. Well, you know, the act of writing a good story and a good myth, just the participation in that is enough, and that's what I think
They're teaching us
trying
what
get
we need
at.
to know. Oh, for sure. Game of Thrones, The Walking Dead,
Yeah.
shows like that especially, where you see all these different
Nobody starts
discordant
writing
groups
books
of people that suddenly have to team up
Yeah.
together to work together, even though they
Yeah.
normally wouldn't get along to survive a greater foe, a greater danger is very much what we're facing in the meaning crisis, our own capacity for self-destruction. You know, we can definitely set ourselves back as humans, and we can set this planet back quite a great deal, and it'll be okay without us, but you know, there's a lot of cute bunny rabbits and kittens out there.
Hey man,
Young people,
is it cute?
young trees, and life forms that deserve to live as, you know,
Is a kitten cute if there's no human to look at it?
I'm saying.
Just saying.
There's
Can-
some deep, dark
cats need
rainforest
us.
left on this planet that we can still keep alive.
And you know, well, if the theory that the Amazon rainforest was actually created by a relatively advanced, like a pharmacopoeia, well, we've built forests before. We know how to build dirt. We know how to purify things. We know how to work within ourselves.
Yeah.
We're really good at transferring information freely.
Yeah, have you noticed how the environmental movement doesn't really talk about pollution anymore?
No, because it's all scam. Sorry, guys.
It's just
It's
trying
just a
to
lot
scare
of money
people.
being made.
And
money
corporations
laundering.
are finding ways to make money, but
Yep.
yeah, we're not actually dealing with pollution or the degradation of the rainforest anymore.
No,
That's
don't you use
microplastics in the oceans or any of that.
make sure you recycle all your stuff, and then we'll sell it to China or another country that doesn't care and just throws it in the Pacific Ocean. That was the big scandal when we found out about
Well, you
that.
know where like 95% of solar panels come from?
China,
China.
yeah, and slave labor.
Slave labor, and actually,
Yeah, actually,
not just China, but slave. Oh God,
yeah,
we got to be careful because we're on a.
yeah. But no, and that's
Multinational corporations don't seem to really care for the individual and free peoples of nations from which they
well, sharpen your
derive
mind.
their wealth and.
Sharpen your
existence.
mind and strengthen your reasoning skills so you won't be sucked in by the sophists who will just bullshit you all
Amen
the
to that.
time. Because we're dealing with neo-sophists at this point. They're very good at arguing any end of anything, and if you're just like an average person trying to get on with your day, not thinking about like, well, how do I prevent being sucked into a super salience bullshit and navigate through that, like. Most people are going to walk and go, oh yeah, well, they're right. Like I got some solar panels on my house, and it does this, or like the windmills. Oh my goodness, those huge. You know how they recycle those things? They say they're recyclable. Those big ass fins that they got that are fiberglass and balsa wood. They grind them up and then they burn them to cook aggregate.
Okay.
So yeah, it's recycled. It's burnt. It's turned into fuel. I can burn my trash in my backyard. Like I don't need you to do
It
it.
doesn't seem like the worst way to make energy, though. But our
Sure.
ocean turbines
But
seem like a
they-
really good idea.
But they don't really tell you, oh yeah, no, we recycle it into fuel by burning
The
it.
oil industry is a pain in the butt, and they've really blocked things like hemp from becoming a mass biodiesel
Yeah.
fuel source.
Well, I gotta
we're
say-
using corn instead, and it takes a lot of corn to fill up a gas tank. Like you can feed a kid
Oh.
for a year off of one tank's worth of ethanol fuel.
Well, and you know how much viable growing land you have to take up just to grow corn?
Yeah, well, yeah, and you can
For
grow
ethanol.
hemp friggin' anywhere, cannabis anywhere.
Well, and if like, there's also like with the
But
issue here.
big pharma, textile industries, big oil, a lot of things have been
Well, you
against
notice the
way.
green movement doesn't like nuclear either. And don't get me wrong.
Why?
Hiroshima was terrible, but it was built in a really bad place, and it
Right,
wasn't
and
built for that kind
Fukushima
of
was
place.
a mess too.
5 Mile Island, is that what it is? And Chernobyl, our technology is so much more advanced at this point.
That might be the only way we have, though,
Yeah, I don't
right
like
now,
nu-
to produce
I'm
enough
still
energy
hesitant
for
on
the rest of the
nuclear, but-
world. Yeah, because we're bringing the world out of poverty as we speak, and we need to continue that process. Thank God for there's actually some United Nations programs that are doing good, and as much corruption as there is in every single authoritative body that you see on the planet, there are some people, some individuals that are doing really good work out there, and particular foundations that are doing great work. And we have in the past, 20 years brought half the world out of 20 or so, I forget exactly the number, but we've brought half the world out of poverty in very recent history.
It's most of the world now doesn't live in abject poverty.
Yeah.
That wasn't the
Less
case
than
200 years, where most of the world was living in abject poverty.
2/3 of the planet, back in the 90s, was struggling to find potable water.
Well, now, even now, with cooking stuff, I'd say, burn your farts, man. Well, burn the methane that comes off of your poop and your food wastes and all that stuff. Methane is very clean. If you're going to burn something, methane is probably the cleanest thing you can possibly burn.
But at what cost? So we here in the Western nations that see that we need to be less polluting, we need to be better stewards of our environment. If we all stop using the fossil fuels, what is China and Russia and North Korea?
Well, if we stop using the fossil fuels, we're going to starve.
They make the vast majority of pollution, particularly China makes a huge proportion of pollution on the planet. Well, and we think that we do. No, actually, because they're producing all of everything that we use over here.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that would help is if we stopped looking at the world as if we're under a demiurge's thumb that is the prison, like the prison guard, and all the systems that we have now as being a reflection of that, trying to hold you down. Life is hard enough as it is, just trying to propagate your genes to the next generation, to think of everything as an oppressive system that's trying to keep you down, including God.
Right.
I do participate in the idea that if God is a benevolent God and we are God's children, the idea is for this experience as human to eventually grow to the point that's on par with the God of everything in the universe or above it.
From whence we came.
And completely, because if you're going to
it's just the one thing turning back into it.
Really, basically every iteration ever, all at once, aware of itself. That's God. But it has to have every iteration ever, and including every random thing that happens in space that could possibly ever happen in space, and all of that.
Yeah.
But
so we need to recognize that our individual nation systems, of course, they're works in progress. They're not perfect. Some of them have a long way to go, and
there's some pretty evil people at high-level positions, but that doesn't mean everybody.
But it's not for us to judge. It's for us to improve ourselves from within.
Yes.
Because if you want to see a change in this world, it comes from inside out, first and foremost. We're not going to see the change until we can actually be the change as people. And if we're easily corrupted, our representatives will be corrupted, our governments will become corrupted by powerful interests that eventually become more powerful than governments. And the very things that we fear in this world are what we create,
Yeah.
So we take the power back by
taking back your own personal agency to make decisions for yourself and come to a rational, reasonable understanding of the universe. And if you can find God while you're doing that, even better. And if you're a person who doesn't believe in it, but you can still find truth and meaning in life, great.
The game, right?
But you got to do it for yourself, and I got to do it for myself.
And it's not everyone else's fault out there. It's just life unfurling and happening and unfolding. And we can't control what happens in the world around us, but we can control how we respond. We get to choose. You get to choose your emotional state. You don't have to be offended. Meaning. You don't have to be resentful. You can be loving and grateful. And sometimes there will be moments where offense will happen, and you can choose how to roll through the situation. But
even if you choose not to, that's still a choice. I don't know who said that, but that's not a meism. That's somebody else said that. But
it's like we know that old adage, what you resist persists, and we keep on trying to resist things to create change in this world. And I really like the Bucky Fuller method of you never create a new system by trying to overthrow the existing unless you have some scaffolding for something new in place. Basically, you really need to create a new system that makes the existing one obsolete.
We got to get rid of this system.
So build it up now.
What do you have?
You got something better. Start scaffolding
a
better ways of doing things that will outcompete the current ways. And if you got them, let's use them. The only ones that I know of right now are agape, unconditional love, wisdom practices, collective sense making.
Yeah, I would
working together to figure things out.
I would think a good combination of spiritual practices, like say like religions and other things, and pure unbridled capitalism with an equal hand, and how like people have a very strong spiritual system, faith system, understanding system, but then they have the ability to freely trade with each other. So
Free and fair
free
trade
trade with
system,
good
yeah.
morals, because you can't just enforce morals. Like, because if you don't have morals, then you're just gonna be like, well, I'm gonna figure out a way to subvert that.
Everyone's going to lie and
So,
cheat and steal and
yeah.
murder and kill and everything else. Yeah. And
Yeah.
if you got to have some kind of moral groundwork, and so we do need a sense of the sacred.
Yeah, we need to start
need
bringing back that sacred.
recognize what transcends us, what is ineffable, what is beyond our comprehension, yet somehow has birthed the beauty of this universe and these lives that we get to experience, and find the ways to live in an optimal flow with that great mystery, whatever it is. It has granted us with this capacity for lovingness. We have that. We have the access to wisdom. We have our creativity, our co-creativity, and our collective sense-making capacities. So we can do a lot together. We don't have to be pit against one another so easily. Yeah. This game of divide and conquer is getting old. It's getting really
I'm getting
old.
real tired of it. I'm losing my general politeness about these things.
We're all losing friends and family over little political differences, and these political differences have become our religions, our whole sense of reality, that we're holding on to with our dear life, since we have no sense of the sacred anymore.
No, we tend to worship that kind of stuff now too. If we don't have the sense of the sacred, we're going to worship our differences and our groups and our ideologies, and we become worshipful within it and faithful to that. And if you're faithful to, not to use this terminology, but if you're faithful to a bad master, you're doomed.
We don't know if we're under bad masters if we're not self-reflecting.
Yeah, precisely.
If we're not looking within, and we're not challenging our own systems of beliefs. We're not challenging our own preferred ideals, and the things that we prefer to believe might not be true. And it's good to challenge ourselves, because if we are searching for that, what is good and true for one and all, then we will find a way.
And don't you really want what's true and good
to peace? And
so might as well start make sure that what you're sure of is actually sure.
Yeah. We don't have to be so certain about everything.
All right, that's a good breaking point. I got to use the little boy's room.
All right, let's take a quick break, guys. We're gonna take 5. Y'all do what you got to do. We'll be right back. We are here. We are back. And so let's go ahead and jump back in here. We're going to get into the second half of this series now, and we get into some exciting stuff here. We're going to engage with some pop culture that everyone's going to find familiar as we connect with how influential Gnosis has been on our culture, on the world's culture, up to now. So here we go. We're jumping back in now, guys.
It's very both pertinent to us today and very radical for its time, because you have basically the challenging of not even a belief, it was just an unquestioned presupposition that our relationship to the gods was one of servitude and slavery, getting transformed into, the core of spirituality is not worship. The core of spirituality is self-transcendence. Healing and freeing people from existential entrapment and their suffering. And that our mythology and our practices should always be in service of us reuniting to who and what we are. Now we love this story. Notice how, first of all, it's still got all the Platonic elements. Here are the people trapped in the cave. They're bound. They get the secret knowledge, right, that frees them so that they can return to and see the light, right? But of course, for Plato, you come back down into the cave. For the Gnostics, you try to spread the message to as many people as you can. So it has the Platonism. It, of course, has a way of connecting that Platonism to Christianity by reinterpreting Jesus as the embodiment of Gnosis rather than as a sacrifice in whom we should have faith. Jesus is a teacher who provides us with something like what the shaman did and what our therapist does, provides us with the keys to unlocking, right? Unlocking all the ways in which these patterns, these sociocultural, political, economic patterns, ways of thinking and being, are just permeated into layers of our psyche and ways of being in the world that they just exacerbate our suffering, our existential entrapment, and the way it is fragmenting our world and ripping apart our agency. So we long for that now. This was Hans Jonas' great insight. We long for that now. So we go to movies that show this, right? So DeConnick goes through several movies that are basically modern portrayals of this Gnostic mythology. Of course, famously, and it brings all of these elements in. The Christian, the Platonic, and the Gnostic, of course, is the Matrix. Right? Because the Matrix is this. You're entrapped in a world of illusion. There are evil overlords who are trying to keep you entrapped so you don't ever discover who you truly are, right? But you know, remember there's a scene in the movie, like a splinter in your mind that there is something wrong and you don't belong, right? That's the Matrix. Or you can see a movie starring Jim Carrey, The Truman Story. Notice, of course, the play on words there. Right? Truman, discovering who you really are. And he grows up in a world, right, with an overlord that has manufactured it to keep him from ever actually getting his true agency, finding true love, etc. And what he has to do is get the knowledge in order to get beyond this God. We keep telling this story because it's a myth. Because it keeps pointing us to patterns that are pervasive and profound and powerful. And we can't quite articulate them and we can't quite know them. But the myth at least gives us a moment of, right, at least narrative and symbolic recognition of our suffering. So, the Gnostics are offering a radical form of the Actual Revolution. Now, it carries with it a dark side. As I keep showing you with all of this stuff, the light side and the dark side of Christianity, right? And you probably could see how there's a Gnostic element also within Star Wars. You're trapped within the Empire with the evil overlord, the Emperor, and you have to get free, and you need to have the knowledge of the Force that will set you free, and blah, 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 blah. Like, we love this, and we keep wanting to do it. That's great. What's the dark side of the Gnostic vision? The dark side of the Gnostic vision is it doesn't have to, and many of the original Gnostic writers that I've read it's not the case, but it can do this. Okay. This is ultimately a conspiracy theory. This is a grand conspiracy theory. That one of the reasons why this is comforting is, behind all the apparent chaos and suffering, there actually is some evil overlord. I mean, one of the things that would make evil so much more tractable for us is if it was ensconced within an individual. But this is the ultimate conspiracy theory. There's a whole system that is keeping you from realizing the truth and who you truly are, the true man that you are, and how you belong elsewhere and living another way. And now you say, oh, well, conspiracy. Well, stop and think. Look, what are the Gnostics saying? This evil overlord, Some of them say, not all of them, it's the same as the God of the Old Testament. Who are the people that worship the God of the Old Testament? The Jews. Here's an idea that's now being sown into Western culture. The Jews are part of a conspiracy to keep us from realizing our true heritage. And that is going to turn out to be an extraordinarily dangerous and bloodthirsty idea. Nazism is a twisted, and other people have pointed this out, Nazism is not primarily a political or even a socioeconomic movement. Nazism is a twisted, Gnostic response of the meaning crisis that was being magnified in the Weimar Republic of Germany. So there is a dark side to Gnosticism. So we should have an ambivalent attitude towards it. In order to understand it, we must think of how we can extricate Gnosis from Gnosticism. How can we salvage Gnosis from Gnosticism? Just like how can we salvage agape from Christianity? How can we salvage wisdom from the ancient nomological order? So on one side, right, you can see the dangers. Why did this happen? It's a long, complicated story, but part of the problem, part of the reason is the emerging Orthodox Church. It wasn't even an Orthodox church at that time. It called itself the Apostolic Church. The church that thought Jesus was absolutely unique, right? And the point was to worship him, and that faith is what was crucial. Faith in the sense of believing in him as a sacrifice. Persecuted. And I mean that literally. Persecuted the Gnostic form of Christianity and drove it underground. And as underground, it became enmeshed with any type of group that was trying to challenge the established order. And that's how it tends to surface again in Nazism. We'll see there are more things that feed into Nazism, but that's all we need for right now. Gnosticism, of course, is also deeply influential in some very important people. So here are three people we're going to start talking about more and more. You've already heard me talk about Tillich. Tillich is one of the great theologians. Tillich talks about the meaning crisis in a classic book that I highly recommend to you called The Courage to Be. And he talks about that the response to that is a way of discovering, and it's clear because of how he talks about symbols, and he talks about transformation, although he does not use the term, but he's talking about gnosis. He's talking about that the response to the meaning crisis is the gnosis of the God beyond the God of theism. That what we need to do is discover the God, who of course is not a God, because it's the God beyond the God of theism, as the meaning crisis destroys the mythology of, right, the theistic mythology of God. Can we rediscover sacredness in a way that liberates us from our existential suffering? This is the core. Now, Tillich thought that Christianity could play a significant role in that, and one of my friends and colleagues, Jonathan Pajot, thinks that Christianity will, in fact, go through this kind of self-transformation so that it can move beyond the meaning crisis. I'm not convinced of this, but I do respect these points. Many of you have heard me already mention Jung. Jung basically was deeply Jung is to Gnosticism what, cognitive behavioral therapy is to Stoicism. Jung is basically a transformation into psychotherapeutic context, the Gnostic mythology. And you should understand why that is not a coincidence. the Gnostic mythology is a way, right, of giving us a scaffolding for inactive analogy, inactive anagoge, which of course are so central to therapeutic processes. The person you haven't heard me mention, and I'll talk about more later, is Corbin. Corbin was very much about trying to recover this kind of knowing, because his great concern was that we had lost this kind of knowing, and therefore we had lost our capacity for the transformation and the liberation that it can bring about. And we can get trapped in these historical patterns that fragment our world and tear apart our agency. So, because they represent the radicalization of the axial revolution, there is much to learn from Gnosticism, but I am not advocating an attempt to resurrect it or bring it back. What we need to do is understand, and that's what these individuals represent, and notice that at least one of them was one of the most courageous opponents of the Nazis. Tillich was the first non-Jewish academic to be fired from the Nazis, because from the very beginning and consistently he identified them and resisted them. So keep this whole framework in mind. Can we salvage from Gnosticism Gnosis and some of its radical message about how we can reconfigure, how we can have a non-theistic, non-supernaturalistic understanding of sacredness? Can we do that and avoid the conspiratorial way of thinking that can be so damaging and has been? See, one of the things that Gnosticism can quickly elide into, right, is that those utopian, they're so enticing, right? Those utopian ideologies that give you the great conspiracy theory and tell you that you belong to the chosen few, the chosen race or the chosen class, right? And that violence is acceptable because the system is evil and must be destroyed. I point you to the work of Chris Hedges, because he's criticized both sides, right? He wrote a book, American Fascists, about fundamentalist Christianity and its pervasive, right, portrayal of a grand conspiracy. But he also wrote a book on the new atheists and how they also represent a utopic perfectionism that sanctions violence. And if you don't believe me, take a look at Hitchens and Harris and the proposals for nuclear first strikes against the Islamic world, etc. So, I'm suggesting to you, and I'm trying to give you an argument for it, how we should have an ambivalent attitude towards Gnosticism. Let's put it back in the historical picture, because I told you about the three that are crucial and how they're intermessed with each other. We have the emerging Christianity. We've seen this by taking a look at, right, Jesus and John and Paul. And we've seen how it's interacting with Gnosticism. We've already seen how Gnosticism is influenced and influencing Platonism. And in particular, I want to look at Neoplatonism, because it is also deeply enmeshed with Christianity. This triangle is going to be necessary for understanding the final elements of the orders of meaning, the grammar of, as I've put it before, of meaning. We've got the nomological order. What is Neoplatonism? By the way.
Okay, before we go on here, guys, cover what we just went through.
So you mentioned the Matrix and the Truman Show.
Yes, in Star Wars.
Um,
Yeah, trapped in a false world. There's agents that are keeping you from true freedom, from true knowledge. It's a more gray world. Well, actually, in the Matrix story, the world that they wake up in
It's
is
green.
it's green,
Green to gray.
green to
But
gray.
so it's, you know, it's the,
But it's a false, it's shadows, they're not true forms. Yeah.
yeah, these stories are pointing out strong, profound patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what a myth is. It points out these reoccurring patterns that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like every good story we have follows some type of archetypical mythic arc.
Yep. Yep.
And which is good. You know, we create these myths and they help us learn and understand.
Yeah.
You know, take the red pill. That has now become a common thing to say. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, you know.
Yeah, Neo had awakened. He
Yeah.
was the one.
Yeah.
He had awakened to his true potential.
Yeah.
He had to be. It's very Christian in its influence as well. So Neoplatonic, Neo, the one, comes from Neoplatonism. Truman, the true man. There's an overlord that's keeping him down, that's keeping him from true love and from being able to have true agency in the world. And so Truman himself has to get the knowledge. He's got to find out the truth of what's really happening around him to be able to be a true man.
So, and then we got into the dark side of Gnosticism, which the light word for it is grand conspiracy theory, but it leads us to like, so he moved us through the, you know, this kind of line, which goes, the Gnostics that believed in the evil overlords, which was the God of the Old Testament, and who worshipped the old God, the Jews. And then you have the Nazis who think that the Jews have a conspiracy theory to control everybody and everything and keep everybody down and keep the true German down and all that stuff. And that's, you know, that's a danger of having this Gnostic thinking wrapped
Twisted,
up in
dark,
twisted.
Twisted up in a dark way.
As a response to the suffering that they were dealing with, because, you know, it's like post World War I Germany was a pretty horrible
people,
place.
They blamed a whole group of people. There's super generalized an entire group of people, and they blamed them of something to the point to where they're willing to commit mass violence.
Yeah.
And that danger repeats over and over and over again in human cultures. You saw it happen also in the Soviet Union to great and very
solid in Maoist China,
disturbing extent.
Solid, Pol Pot in the Cambodian killing fields and all that stuff. You know, we're still seeing it today in you know, certain places.
So yeah, these ultimate conspiracy theories that they're like BS stories that we tell to comfort ourselves. They're a very dark way of trying to find and create balance in the world, but this is what happens. So we have these positive myths that help us recognize these pervasive patterns that can recur when society starts to break down, to warn us and ward us against this darkness. And so it is important for us to be ambivalent towards Gnosticism and understand how we may be able to save the practice of gnosis from the dark side of Gnosticism, and agape from Christianity, wisdom from the ancient orders, and so on.
Yeah, how not to get pulled into the grand conspiracy theory, or the like what, you know, Paul thought, you know, like somebody had to die to pay for our sins for us to be forgiven. You know, there had to be a sacrifice, you know, like, so how
you just must believe that, and that's how you will be saved.
Yeah, so how do we get the agapic love out of, say, that end of Christianity?
You get it from following the way of Christ, which intuitively Christians, a lot of Christians still understand. You know, that makes sense.
A little rhetorical.
We're followers of Christ.
But
that was a thing that happened in the church.
Yeah, and so how do we get agape removed from the dogma of that religion?
Yes.
How do we get gnosis removed from the grand conspiracy theory temptation? You know, and well, one way is to, you know, like, become ambivalent to it, but also, like, get it out of your head that, you know, God hates you and treats you like, you know, you're in a little prison cell, and, like, it's always, you know, that whole oppressor versus oppressed thing. It's only going to be used against you. And,
Yeah.
you know, that club you think you're in isn't a club you think you're in. It's
No.
a club they beat you with.
That's exactly what it ultimately is, unfortunately.
But, so, you know, of course, Gnosticism can go into, you know, Nazism or various forms of socialism, which Nazism is a form. Then we have three interesting individuals. Tillich, who definitely wasn't a Nazi. They didn't like
No,
him.
he was like the first academic that was of German descent, right? That they removed.
Yeah, and his idea
Or
was...
I don't know what they did with him. Did he say they outcast?
I think he was like fired, stripped of all of his credentials. You know,
Yeah.
what you're seeing a lot now with people who say the wrong things.
He was
Anyway,
encouraged to be.
yeah, and so his, I guess, idea was what we were just talking about. You know, like moving beyond, so like the God beyond the God of theism.
Yeah.
So moving beyond this, well, basically, you know, getting the agape out of the theistic tradition of Christianity and all the rules related to
Beyond
that.
the gods of dogma to the God
Yeah,
way,
yeah,
the godlike way,
yeah. And then Jung
the loving way of God,
was
you could say.
a Gnostic medic, if you will, using it for the, you know, psychotherapeutic, helping the mind, you know.
Yeah, so positive Gnosticism is happening here. He's using Gnosis to help with psychotherapeutic transformation, to help enact an anagoge transformation in people.
And Corbin wanted to recover the Gnostic knowing, the way of knowing that.
Gnosis, yes.
Yeah,
this way
Gnosis,
of
not the club Gnostic, but the
way of Gnosis
Gnosis,
itself, the
yes.
practice of self-realization, anagoge, self-transcendence.
and having that type of knowing and understanding through a knowing through experience. Man, it's hard to like put that together because it's like, well,
An
understanding
experiential knowing beyond the
Yes,
intellectual. Yeah, indeed. They wanted you to actually have the higher state of consciousness to that then motivates us through the process of self-transcendence and transformation.
So resist the utopia! Exclamation
Yeah.
point.
Well,
It
yeah,
promotes
yeah.
violence.
I love that. So all three of these guys we will see just are all about encouraging us to discover sacredness in a way that helps save us as individuals and save humanity as a collective, to save our civilizations from breakdown. And we can sell the ideas. Hopefully we can salvage Gnosis and its radical message, the potential that it enables for us. Hopefully we can break beyond the conspiracy theories, like these ideas we were just talking about, where people start to think they're in a special class, and these other people are the problem, and they're what is the source of all of our ills, and violence must be inflicted against them.
Well, and you can go two ways about that too. So either it's a special class that deserves to inherit the world and somebody's getting in the way,
Sure.
or it's a special class that is uniquely persecuted by some system that needs to awaken. This is where you get, you know, the proletariat versus the bourgeois. You know, really, most of the bourgeois were just like, you know, farmers that finally got out of serfdom and were able to like employ people and buy a tractor. You know, but you know, so you have the proletariat would be the oppressed, meager people, and the only reason why they're poor and they can't afford anything, and they're, you know, just basically slaves to the rich farm owner. You know, the farm
It's because
owners.
the evil overlord, right?
Because, and even if the farmer isn't the evil overlord, is still participating in this system to make sure the evil overlord maintains their position. And then what ended up happening...
just starts condemning everything, trying to find some monster to pin it on.
Well, this utopic
everybody.
vision of everybody can be great and have everything they want and just feel perfectly fine gives you a pretty good goal to say, okay, I want that, so violence is fine, and we can do this. And then you become the evil overlord. And
then it just repeats.
And yeah, you know, like a Soviet is a council. So you have a council of people that are the evil overlord. It's no longer like a single person.
There's a central authoritative body there
Yeah.
that is going to rule on how we're going to find a way to distribute everything
Yeah. Well, you
perfectly equally across, regardless of who does the most work or who invents what or this or that. And
but really, you get more if you're just a party member, and if you're a higher member within the party, you get even more. So then everybody either wants to be a party member, or, well, if you're not, you're the lowest rung on the ladder, and you are to be despised because how dare you not be a part of this party?
You got to be a part of the group. Yeah, you can't be an individual.
Because we wanted this utopia, and even though, like,
well, maybe we can achieve something like a fair distribution of the commons together. But it's not going to be through the systems that we've tried already that have killed hundreds of millions of people. And we have our systems today. We have, easily corrupted and imperfect free market systems, but they're a huge step above what humans were experiencing prior to free trade, where most of us weren't even allowed to trade and we just were poor serfs. And that was the serfs or slaves. And you might have history for millions of years and all over.
And you might have a pretty decent life if you've got a good, like lord if you're a serf, or master if you're a slave.
I said millions of years, thousands of years.
Well,
long time.
It's long enough.
Long enough.
Yeah. But that's we're finally at a point now where we can truly embrace our own agency in the world.
We came up with systems of self-governance. Unfortunately, we've allowed ourselves to become corrupted, or representatives to become corrupted.
Well, we became lazy. We stopped interacting. We stopped participating.
Even to recognize that, like something like corporatism and multinational corporations that see themselves as beyond the nations from which they spring, do seem to be kind of taking over things on the planet. That can be another conspiracy theory, and we got to remember we are humanity. We are this planet, growing itself, and it's all of us. The real revolution begins within.
You said humanity, and I got the image of a manatee with like a top hat. Like his name's Hugh, and he's a manatee. Humanity.
Sorry. Humanity.
We are humanity. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Sea lion barks in the background.
Well, we do need to start recovering things from the past, whether it's agapic aspects of Christianity or the gnosis within Gnosticism, and even go even further back and try to get what we can. But that requires us to participate in our thinking. Like, I think that the greatest threat to the world right now is how comfortable we've gotten with allowing something else or someone else to do most of our thinking for us, and most of our reasoning on
most of our reasoning, wrong. Even our moral reasoning.
Yes, which is particularly dangerous because now I'm seeing it on the TV, so it's okay to say those things. No, it's not. It's okay to I saw it on the internet. It's okay to go, stand out in traffic and glue myself to the road or whatever. It's like, no, it's not. You're not doing anything. Get out of the way, dummy. I keep seeing people do these things, and okay.
Sometimes that might be the thing to do. It depends on what you're doing it for, really.
I mean,
but that's
playing the road. If you get run over, I'm not going to shed a tear. I'm sorry. That's just, it's dangerous.
Well, when you're in a system of self-governance like ours, you can actually pre-plan your protests.
There's also far more effective ways than just gluing yourself to things that
Martin Luther King had to lead people across a bridge, at the end of which they were going to get severely beaten, and they were going to take blows without retaliation to show their agapic love. So sometimes there are cases, but the way that they went about it,
I think we're getting beyond the point I was trying to make.
Said this is how we're going to be equal was through love, right?
I want to just make sure I don't lose the point that I was making. We need to participate. We need to not just the reason why people follow Martin Luther King is because they're all participating, they're all talking about it. But now we don't do any thinking. We just hit a button and we get food ordered to us. We turn on a thing and it tells us what we need to think. And you notice, when you have conversations with people, you can almost predict their responses because...
Or you hear them saying things that coming from this news station or that news station.
Or this article that came out and everybody starts buzzing about it, so then everybody's starting to recycle it. And then, to a certain extent, we should, enhance our distributed cognitive network
Sure.
But
we should pay attention, but
you need to do that with people who are paying attention, because if you
got to look at multiple sides of every story too, and without a preference for any one ideological perspective, just to try and find out what is true as well as you can.
And you can do this with Christianity and Gnosticism to find those core nuggets and bring it back out, and do it, with Buddhism and all the other ways. It's just.
And engage in those the practices that we have found to be true and good for one and all, because there are ones that are time tested and proven. We know that agapic love is tried and true. Unconditional love works. That makes the best kinds of human beings, and it helps us know how to act in every situation. Meditation helps us recognize our presence and our oneness with everything. And contemplation helps us be able to delineate between what is useful and good.
Well, ultimately, we need to maybe inspire other people, but get more people doing this and stop being, intellectually and mentally lazy.
Or just and resentful and blaming the world outside without engaging in the world honestly and lovingly as we can, and with good faith intentions for everybody out there. Why are we judging people based off of the group that they're in before we even get to know the individual? Why are we doing that? Why are we recapitulating these old ways that were dark and evil? We know that it's wrong to racialize people. We know that it's wrong to be bigoted and to view and overgeneralize, whole swaths of human beings, painting them with very low resolution labels.
Oh, it sounds like you watch Fox News. No, but thank you. I hear that all the time. Oh, you sound like one of them. And it's just like,
that's hilarious.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
To CNN, to CBS, to
NBC,
well, that's what I try to tell them.
I'm like that. That's all the same crap to me, darling. I don't know.
Heaps of crap for a long time. Yeah,
I don't watch.
They've just gotten worse.
I watch it.
Decades.
I watch it
worse
like
and worse.
I watch it like you watch
all of them.
A disgusting bug that's trying to get into your house. You want to know where it is so it doesn't get into your house. I don't watch it for entertainment. I watch it to see what it's doing.
See what it's telling people.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're covering a hurricane or something that they can't be particularly biased about.
Yeah, and so sometimes, even the bad ones have a good take every now and again, so it's always good to catch the good take when it's there.
It's helpful. A way of navigating reality right now is to find the good faith actors from liberal outlets, conservative outlets, progressive, anarchistic, wherever. Find a bunch of sources. Find the good faith actors within, the journalists out there that are doing work that you can tell are honestly intentioned, and they just have their particular perspective. But look for the ones that you can clearly tell are reliably reporting actual information and telling you what they saw, and then say, okay, now this is my opinion about it. And don't be so quick to trust your own judgment, because they utilize multi-billion-dollar and decades-old psychological manipulation techniques nowadays to sell you everything from toothpaste to your belief system. So be wary. It's very easy for us to get lied to.
Well, it's good that you said that, because so we can have a higher state of consciousness very easily and very cheaply nowadays. And we have the rituals, and we participate in them, but what we've found ourselves lacking is a supportive community that is also well versed in these, wisdom traditions, and have, good hearts, and rebuilding that outside layer, because that's really what's degraded. We still have the rituals.
Communities need to know how to navigate these new times. Our neighbors, one another, we need to be able to look out for one another.
Yeah, and start talking about stuff, like this. Like, if you're the type of person that finds this stuff fascinating, it might take you 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different people, but eventually you'll find one that you can really start talking to, and then you got 2 people talking at this place. You're hanging out at the bar, you start talking, and then somebody else will be like, oh, that sounds interesting. And then they get involved, and then it starts building.
This is how we stitch things back together. Because right now, nobody agrees on anything. Mm-hmm. Anything.
What are you talking about? We agree on everything.
That's not a very stable structure for civilization. And civilization, it's a growing process as well. We got to continue to build the scaffolding of the new systems that will make the existing ones obsolete, whatever aspects of them are not serving the widest variety of people as well as possible. We can only figure that out together. We can't do it by demonizing and othering one another so consistently, as we have certainly been doing these past few years in particular.
Yeah. All right. Before I start grumping and griping, let's move on. I could really start opining here.
Well, see, this is why we are seeking the guidance and the assistance and encouragement of Professor John Vervaeke, because he's worked very hard with his colleagues on finding a navigable way for humanity in these times.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump back in, guys. Here we go.
Platonism is also why the main character in the Matrix is called Neo, for Neoplatonism, and he's often referred to as the One because the One is the central thing within Neoplatonism. Again, there's a reason why all of these mythological patterns keep being so attractive to us. So Plotinus, let me give you an analogy. I think this is a helpful analogy. Scientists right now are trying to integrate quantum mechanics and relativity, the two great theories. And if they come up with it, they'll have the grand unified theory. Einstein tried and failed. Many people think they've had an answer, and then it collapses. By analogy, Plotinus is the grand unified field theory of ancient spirituality. Because what does he do? Well, he takes Plato's spirituality, he takes the whole idea of anagoge, right, from Plato. He takes Aristotle's theory, the whole Aristotle worldview, the theory of knowing, right, the theory of the structure of the world. We've talked about that. And he takes from the Stoics that whole therapeutic project, right? Overcoming modal confusion. And what he does is he integrates them together. He integrates them together in a powerful way. How does he do that? Well, he talks about, first of all, he says, well, you can start anywhere. You can start in any one of these places in Plotinus' writing and then get to the other two. It is such a powerfully integrated system. And when you're reading Plotinus, it's not like when you're not just reading an argument, you're also undergoing a spiritual exercise that is trying to transform your state of consciousness and your cognition. So, what's the main theory here? Let's start here. So, if you remember, you have Aristotle's conformity theory. We know something, right? Remember this, by conforming to it, by sharing the same structural functional organization with it, right? And then Plotinus says, oh, wait a sec, Aristotle also has sort of levels of being. And we talked about this. We talked about at the lowest level, right, there's pure potentiality, and at the highest level, there's pure actuality. And we don't need to get into the metaphysics, but here's the idea. There are levels of reality, levels of realness. As we know, and this doesn't mean intellectual, this is participatory. This is very much like Gnosis, and he's in discussion with Gnosis. We know that Plotinus has Gnostic students. He's also critical of them, but this is not just intellectual knowing. This is deeply participatory knowing. As we make these, listen to my language, as we make these levels of reality viable to us, as they become livable to us, right? We conform to them and we change. And this is Eric Pearl's brilliant idea, right? All of his stuff is so good, right? as we conform and make this level of reality real to us, we're conforming to it, and we're also moving to a higher level of the self. As we conform, we're also altering, and this is the anagoge of Plato, right? We're altering what level the self is at. And of course, as we alter the level that the self is at, we're more capable of living in that higher level of reality. What this does for us is it helps us deeply remember the being mode, who we really are. Let me try and put this all together with an example. What is it that makes something real? I mean, think about this. Think about Socrates here. Right? Socrates, like, what do you mean by real? Like, we care about whether or not things are real. Like, it really matters to us. Look at the word really. It really matters to us. And yet, what is it that makes something real? How much time have you put into that? Because if you are driven by a pursuit of realness and you don't understand what it is, if it's something you're pursuing and you don't understand, remember what that is? That's the gap of bullshit. Okay, so what makes something real? Well, and notice for Plotinus, and again, Eric Pearl, especially in his book, Thinking Being, just a fantastically brilliant book. Can't recommend it enough, right? But it's not what makes something real, it's how do we also sense it as real? So it's both what structurally, functionally organizes it to be real, two sides of the worldview, and how do we sense it? How does it make us be able to sense it as real? And here's the answer. And in some sense, it's basic, but in another sense, it's profound. What makes something real is how one it is, how integrated it is, how much it is structurally, functionally organized. So we treat the object as more real than the shadows because it's more structurally, functionally organized. That's talking about the object. What is it to understand something? Well, here's a bunch of separate things, and when I understand them, I find how they're all one, how they can all be integrated together. When I understand something, I understand how all of its parts are integrated together. And then what we do is, okay, these things have been integrated here, and then, and I can integrate these here, this is more real. What's one behind all of these various things, and then I can, of course, find what's underneath all of this, and what's underneath this, and what's underneath this. Things become more real to us as we integrate them together, and they're more real as things as they are integrated together. So, as we try and find the deeper underlying principles that integrate things together, we become more integrated together. And we become more real. We are realized. We're the object, we're getting to what's more real, and we, as we become more integrated, more actualized, are becoming more real. I'm becoming more integrated, and you can see this is Plato's anagoge, right? The inner conflict within me is being reduced. I'm becoming more real as I'm becoming more integrated. And that is allowing me to make viable and real these more integrated, deeper levels of reality. And then the whole thing spins anagogically. And what I have is I move from where things are only potential, they don't have much form, like in Aristotle, all the way up to as having the greatest structural functional organization they can. And all of this it's not just a theory. It's a change in my existential mode. I am becoming more real. That's why I use the word realization. It's simultaneously a making more real of the world and me, and becoming more aware of what's more real. But what is it? What's down here? Or up, depending on which way you want to draw these lines. What's down? What's here? Well, it's got to be, right? The principle that makes everything else real, that integrates everything together. It can't in any way be multiple. So Plotinus calls this the one. He doesn't mean the single. This is that by which reality is realized and our mind realizes reality. Plotinus uses the metaphor of light. Just like light is itself invisible and makes everything seeable, the one is not anything we can ever know. You can't know the one because it is that by which everything is known. It is that by which everything is. So how do you ever reunite with it? If you can't know it, if it is beyond all possible thought, because thought breaks things apart. If it's beyond all possible, how do you know it? You can't know it. You can't have it. You can't have it even in thought. You can't have it even in the most beautiful theory. You can't have it. You can only be it. You can only have gnosis of the one by being one. So at the height of Plotinus' system is a higher state of consciousness, an awakening experience. But notice, it's completely integrated with the best science and the best scientific psychotherapy of the time. There is no deep division in Plotinus between spirituality, science, and therapy. They are all beautifully, mutually supporting, interwoven, and meshed together. It's the culmination of everything from the Greek axial age. Next time I want to talk about how all of these currents, Christianity, Gnosticism, and Neoplatonism, are going to be taken up by Augustine. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Meow, 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 meow. Meow, ruff, ruff. Meow. Meow, ruff, ruff. Yay. That was awesome.
Good stuff. Good stuff indeed. So we pick back up on Neoplatonism. Neo is the one. The one is central to Neoplatonism. The reason these mythological patterns are so attractive to us is because they help us understand and conform to reality.
Yeah, so Plotinus or Plotinus or Plotinus.
Plotinus?
Plotinus, yes, the I is an I. Plotinus is the grand unified field theory of ancient spirituality.
Yeah, he's the guy that
brought all the
integrates
different methods together from Plato,
Christianity,
Aristotle, and the
Gnosticism.
Stoics.
Yep. Neoplatonism gets to play. So you take the anagogy from Plato, knowing from Aristotle, overcoming modal confusion, existential crisis from the Stoics, integrates Christianity, Gnosticism, and Neoplatonism.
Yeah, so as
These spiritual exercises. Sorry, go ahead.
As we attain, the livable viability of the different levels of Aristotle's levels of being, realness. As you go up in levels of realness, we can form and move into a higher level of the self, which helps us remember the being mode, and it then starts the
Yeah, we level up the self. We change reality and ourselves as we level up the self. We become more capable of living that higher reality.
Yeah. So what is real, and
Yeah.
how do we sense what is real? And the realest of the real is when we can see the one. You got a good way to explain it. Just like you got dash marks, right? You got dash marks, and then you put 1, 2, 3, 4 slash. Group that into 5.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4.
All of these
slash
components,
into
when
5.
we understand them together, they understand.
Okay.
They make something new. This one whole thing clear. So like you're looking at the components of a sink or a car, whatever it is. You learn how those things, what all those components are. You get an idea of this one thing. So this oneness is inherent in our understanding itself.
Yeah, it's the structural functional organization oneness opposed to singular oneness. Instead of being one thing, it's the oneness of all the things together. There's the chair's legs and its back and its seat and the person using it as the chair, and that end of oneness opposed to like oneness being one singular grain of sand.
Right. Right. And this gain in the realness that allows us to be more integrated, more actualized, become more realized, more real ourselves. The inner conflict reduces and makes more viable those deeper states of reality. We move from potential to high actuality, to high structural functional organization with our environments. And I like how he said, becoming more real and aware of what's real at once. Basically what's happening. That by which reality is realized and our minds realize reality is the one. It is that by which everything is known, so we can't know it.
You can only be it.
You can only know it by being it, being as one.
And we're becoming more real. What is it that it said to you? Welcome to the real Neo.
Welcome to the real Neo.
That may not be the exact quote, but when Neo first wakes up and Morpheus is sitting there looking over top of him, he's like all blown out because his eyes never seen light, and he passes out again.
Yeah, the movie is a powerful, powerful metaphor, and we are so attracted by these stories. They really strike us. The Truman Show struck me deeply. That's one of my favorite movies. First Matrix was amazing. And Star Wars, of course, it's a cultural phenomenon. And it goes on, The Walking Dead, Game of Thrones, and there's so many other examples.
Actually, that movie, Maze Runner, is a good example of, moving through and figuring out what is real, because they're quite literally in the center of a maze. And they have to send people out into it to understand it, and they don't know why they're doing it, and they don't know what's in the outside world. And, they don't realize that
that one has aspects of like Logan's Run, and Brave New World, and all kinds of stuff wrapped together. 1984. I was thinking about that during this episode because it was Winston's job, the main character, main protagonist in that story, to update the news, and so he was always just like changing history. Like he's literally like cutting out the truth and changing it with this new truth, and that was what he did. And I was thinking about how Vervaeke is like the opposite of that right now. He's literally trying to help us save language and our understanding, because we need an agreed upon understanding. We can't look back at history and have some misunderstanding of Christianity and Gnosticism and all of that if we're going to continue being able to navigate, because there's wisdom there. And it was.
We should be wary of being contemptuous towards history as well.
No.
Because then you lose so much of what was actually useful and beneficial to humanity.
It's just humans trying to figure it out,
And you know what? Yeah, humans do cruel things to each other and have done terrible, cruel things in the past. But to say, well, the past was way worse than now is, well, guess what? You're going to make yourself a fresh new hell to contend with what you think the past was. We got to be real careful about, viewing everything in history with our modern sensibility glasses on.
Yeah.
Because we're lucky to live in this modern or postmodern world of, you can turn on the tap and get clean water.
Oh, yeah, we're in the postmodernism now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The beyond modern.
Yeah. We're very much in a liminal stage.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, there's a whole art phenomenon
Or phase shift.
called liminal spaces, where they'll take pictures of things or manufacture pictures, which are like hallways and places where you know, transfer yourself from one place to another. Like a hallway, you don't hang out in a hallway, you move through a hallway. So there's this whole art trend called liminal spaces where they take, you know, these pictures that make you feel uncomfortable and uneasy because, you know, something about a space that you're supposed to be moved through, but it's just that space in isolation makes you feel uncomfortable. And maybe we shouldn't be sticking around in this liminal space that we're in right now because it's making us uncomfortable.
The liminal space can be whatever we want it to be. We're just imagining the wrong games to play right now, it seems.
Yeah, well, we're moving through.
There's better games.
We should be moving through, you know.
Well, we utilize the liminal stage for our co-creativity, for our role-playing and trying things out and all of that. But, living in a matrix reality, thinking that reality is true. Well, you know, it's funny because it's even become a fad to think of oneself as woke nowadays. And I feel like maybe we're better off just engaging in an ongoing process of awakening and never be certain that we're ever done being woke. We're always wokening.
When I first started hearing that word being used, like, as far as like, oh yeah, that's woke, bro, it was you
just figured out everything that everyone else before you was wrong about. That's amazing.
The first time I ever heard that word, it was the coffee shop's
we've all been doing that for generations together.
It was the coffee shop's owner's son, and, you know, I said, you know, I don't know, something, you know, whatever, smartness like, and he was like, oh, that's so woke, bro, and I looked at him like, you shut your mouth, and something told me that whole woke thing, and I looked at him and it was like, not woke, waking up. Like,
it's never done.
Yeah.
And don't ever think you're done. Because then you'll be willing to do things to other people if they're not where you want them to be, and so on and so forth. And things that are unfair and cruel and violent and probably not, you know, good for the collective health of the species and planet.
And if you're the type of person where you call other people woke and you're like, haha, they're woke, I'm red-pilled, I'm fine. Yeah, you're pretty much woke too. So, like, it's all
a lot of different versions.
Let's calm down, everybody.
Certainty out there, and it's like,
yeah, let's be a little less certain with everything.
We're all very judgmental. Everyone that's not on the same path that we're on, not recognizing that we're all just friggin' human beings here that have been influenced in different ways, but we can and are certainly able to navigate this road together. Well, we're stronger when we come together, even if we're very diverse and different. You know, unity and diversity is, as the Greeks discovered, is quite empowering for a culture once it gets itself together and gets on the same page. And the same page is not agreeing on what is real so much as just the orientation to be willing to figure that out together.
Yeah. Well, and you know, like, we
need more minds.
Let's have fun asking questions again.
Yeah.
You know, it seems like nowadays, like, you ask a question, they're like, shut up. It's like, but, you know, like, what is that? What is this? Why are we doing this? What does that mean? What actually happened? Who, what, when, where, why, and sometimes how? You know, like,
we're not going to create equality by bringing down any group.
No, you're just going to create a lot of resentment. That's
we have to ennoble the individuals. Yeah. I get that there's like filthy rich people out there that aren't probably doing much good for people and the planet. But how do we outmode them then? How do we inspire the wealthy people that
start being
maybe
more
have somewhat good hearts to be stewards along with us of a better world?
Wealthy people are easy to control. You just got to hit them in their pocketbook. And the best way to do that is re-embrace the being mode, figure out what you need to actually truly be, gear yourself and those that are around you into this mode, like literally shifting, gearing into this mode. The richest people in the world will follow along. You know, rich people, like really, really super wealthy people, they do the stupidest things because they think that everybody else wants them to do that, or it would be advantageous to do that. You know, that whole like get woke, go broke thing. That, like, all these like Disney is like dying. Like, it'd be sad if I liked Disney. to see what it's doing. But it's just like, well, we should do all this stuff and just put all this stuff in here, that like all the woke stuff that everybody wants us to do, and all this stuff, and then everybody, even like people who are like, yeah, I'm woke and I still think this is garbage because it's not good. It's just not good. Bam. Well, those are some of the most powerful people on the planet that are very smart people, and they did a bunch of dumb stuff. So like, let's take some credit, like instead of being like the rich billionaires and billionaires, they're just as dumb as we are sometimes.
We can't
man.
outmode
every
power system on this planet if we work together.
Yeah.
To create new systems that outmode them.
Yeah.
There's such things as like Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Are helping some nations right now, and that kind of puts everyone on a whole different game, on a whole new playing field if played out correctly, or what that might inspire.
Yeah, and
if it's not Bitcoin, then it might be something else. But the idea of trying to create non-corruptible ways of trading together freely is a good idea for human beings.
Yeah, whether it's monetary value or information value or wisdom value.
Use that blockchain check
and the trading freely.
Systems of governance to keep track of the politicians and where the money is going and coming from. I think for some reason our light is turning into a strobe.
Oh yeah, I think it doesn't like this battery pack.
Right on.
I think the battery pack's getting a little too hot for it.
All good.
It's getting tired. I'm getting tired.
Yeah, we're at the end of our notes here anyway. So we just talked about how Plotinus really was the culmination of the Greek axial age. And this now takes us to Augustine, which we'll begin getting to know in our next episode.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for tuning in, joining with us on this learning journey with John Vervaeke. And this immense lecture series, we just finished episode 18. So we got, 32 to go?
Not
We're
too
almost
bad.
halfway there. We're coming up on 25 here, so we'll have to have a big halfway party.
Yeah, do a reflections party where we get a little schwasty and try to get through our notes.
Yeah, right, yeah.
For 4 episodes.
Yeah, right, for 3 or 4 episodes. People seem to enjoy this, though. So.
It's fun. It's like our brains, like defragging and trying to like get all of this together in a reasonable, plausible fashion, and it makes the most sense. And we all interpret base information ever so slightly different, so it helps to have all the rest of it to kind of round everything out and okay, that.
Yeah, we're here to engage in this ongoing brainstorming session with all of you out there, with as much as humanity out there that is also engaging on this journey, on this great project, without us even knowing. There's a lot of us out here, and it is possible for us to help usher in a new age of awakening versus a new age of civilizational breakdown. We've been through that on this planet, and it don't look pretty. And it's already, kind of ugly out there, and you all know how it is.
What's that from The Green Mile? I'm just tired, boss, of how ugly people are to each other,
Yeah, man.
That's what broke John Coffey's heart, is how ugly we are to each other. Think about John Coffey. What would
That was
John
a good
Coffey
series
do?
of books. When it came out, Stephen King released them episodically. And there's 6 little mini books as The Green Mile was released. I remember getting each one of them as they came out, and that was a really powerful story. They did a great job with that movie. What a power! Yeah, that story, man.
That's one of the very few movies that
scene.
actually make me cry.
Yeah, it gets it. King can tell a story. We need more myth makers in the world.
Yes.
I don't even really agree with all of King's politics entirely, but
No,
I see good intentions. That's what we've got to see in one another.
Oh, that's the interesting thing. The baseline archetypical stories and heroes' journeys and all that stuff. If you are to tell one like that and write a good story, it kind of molds your reasoning and thinking that way, even if your other, say political thinking is different. And the only reason why I think Stephen King's political, is back 10, 15, 20 years ago, we were all just normal liberal folk, and then something happened and
Something infested.
people went crazy, we started...
Yeah, what I see today is not liberalism.
It's
It's not
mastery.
even true what we thought of as progressivism 10, 20 years ago.
It's mass derangement.
All different weird
syndromes.
priorities. Yeah. We're not trying to help the poor and stop war anymore. It's a different game. We're acting like we're into that stuff. If that's what the group around us seems to think too. It's all signaling. Everyone's just trying to signal, I'm a part of the in crowd, instead of, what are we doing?
What the hell is this in crowd, and what are you doing?
What are we doing?
There's a cliff there.
Why are we ostracizing everyone?
Yeah.
Why are we outcasting people?
You know, at what
Why are we
point?
trying to censor? We need to be able to talk things out, even the most uncomfortable, difficult things, because they're going to fester otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got to bring the monsters out into light where you can dispel their power, call them out, and prove their BS to be wrong in front of everybody. That's how it's done.
Do that to yourself as regularly as possible.
Yeah,
self-Socratize yourself and don't go light on yourself.
Yeah, use that inner Socrates. We can do the same.
Yeah.
We can at least do the best we can. Be grateful of what we got while we have it.
And be optimistic pessimist or pessimistic optimist, but don't be too,
Yeah.
Too
We're in the
doom.
post optimism stage here. We're being, or you could say we're being pragmatic optimists.
Yeah.
In that sense, is optimism is like an engaged art that we can take part in, just as hope is an action. So I believe.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're doing it. We're doing it. We're doing it.
Yeah. Thank you guys once again for joining us in this. What else are we going to do to get a sense of a handle on these times and the shared reality that we inhabit? How can we feel comfortable? How can we realize what we truly are together? I can't figure this out on my own. I can self-reflect and go in and sense the oneness, but the answer as to how we navigate forward together as a species, I can't answer that. All of us that we can get need to be working on that one.
We won't know until we do it.
Right? Yeah.
You won't know until you do. So
Yeah, and that's what Vervaeke encourages us. Let's start trying to make some changes in our lives. Shit, I remember when Tupac said it. Let's change the way we eat, change the way we treat each other, because it's on us to do what we got to do to survive.
Yeah.
That's it. All right, fam. Love you guys. Thank you for tuning in. I've been Chris.
I've been DJ.
We will talk to you soon.